Good morning. My name is Steve Stroh, NHENJ, and this is the presentation on multipurpose remote nodes, Whatcom County, Washington. With me is Andy Saylor, KF7VOL, who created the project, and Holly Woll-Salkeld of Western Washington University, the site of one of the multipurpose remote nodes. Okay, before we get started, let's go around the circle and introduce ourselves.
Hello, my name is Andy Saylor, Kilo Fox 7, Victor Oscar Lima from Linden, Washington.
I'm Holly Woll-Salkeld. I'm with Western Washington University, which is in Bellingham, but I live in Deming.
I'm Steve Stroh, NHENJ from Bellingham, Washington. This is a presentation about the Whatcom County, Washington multipurpose remote nodes. The reason that these are so remarkable, in my opinion, is that they solve a problem of how to put a remote node, a digital node, in places that aren't mountaintops or towers and aren't individuals' homes. So this is a map of the multipurpose remote nodes, or some of these are multipurpose remote nodes. These are all the WinLink mail servers in Whatcom County. And these are two multipurpose remote nodes that are configured as APRS digipeaters, hence the multipurpose. These are basically the same hardware, they're just configured in software and remote access differently. Okay, Andy, why don't you talk about the process of building a Nexus DRX and talk about what a Nexus DRX is?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. What you'll see in front of you here is the kind of a parts layout of what makes up the Nexus DRX, or the cross-patch board that Bud Churchward produces and makes available. It's a very well-built PCB board he has generated, and then he sells you a parts kit with all the necessary the hardware, the resistors, diodes, LEDs, and things of that nature. So once you buy this kit from Bud, you're able to put it together, and it works as a very, very comprehensive hat that sits on top of the Raspberry Pi 3B plus or 4, any of the Raspberry Pis it'll work on top of. And when you use this this component with the Raspberry Pi, it gives you a lot of the features and abilities that are needed to build these multi-purpose remote nodes. If you were looking for any information further about these, those access to these boards and all of Bud's other products can be found on wb7fhc.com. But they're a great tool and very instrumental in the project.
Okay, and this is the completed version.
Yeah, so we had a couple of together when we were in our heyday building the sites up.
Okay, so just to illustrate, the Raspberry Pi board is the bottom board. The middle board is a sound interface for the Raspberry Pi. And then the third board is the Nexus DRX board that Andy was assembling. And then you stack it up. Okay, this is a typical multipurpose remote node. This is most of it. Again, the Ethernet switch and the UPS aren't shown. That's on the bottom. And this will make a lot more sense in a couple more slides. But this is the componentry of it. And again, most of the magic is in that upper right-hand corner, the Nexus DRX, Raspberry Pi based, essentially a multipurpose digital station. These next few slides are going to be about the specific installation at Western Washington University in Bellingham. And this is where we are going to let Holly talk a little bit about. Oops. So Holly, welcome. And thank you for agreeing to help us with this. So what is your formal position at Western?
I am listed formally as a safety officer, and that's mainly because the state doesn't really have a title for what I do. But I do both fire safety and emergency management at Western.
Who did you first get in contact with about this system?
I was first contacted by Dr. Joseph Trimble, who was a former Western psychology professor here in July of 2019. And Dr. Trimble was involved with several students here at Western that were were active in the ham radio And so I worked with him and one of his students, Bryce Schubert, along with Andy Saylor to get this set up.
Had you ever worked on a project like this in the past?
No, not really. My husband is a ham radio operator, and being involved in emergency management, where everything is, or a lot of things are about relationships. This seemed like a benefit for all. My husband has made me aware of communication possibilities of ham radios, and along with Andy's explanation of how Western's location could benefit communications in the area, it seemed like a good fit. One thing, nice thing about this project was that an earlier employee at Western had already, well, he was into ham radios and had already placed 2 antennas on top of a building here, and had brought the wire down into an office. This meant that I didn't need to actually seek too many permissions to do anything to the building or get it placed. We only needed permission from the new occupant in the office to place it there, and he was fine with that. And he had a very nice spot to put it.
Did you have any concerns about this installation, this system?
The only concern was more at Western's end in sort of the permissions. I did receive permission from my supervisor to move ahead with this. And since we weren't doing anything to the building, I didn't need to go through that whole process. We had to have an access node once for the maintenance, but otherwise it basically plugs along on its own and it doesn't bother anybody. It's out of the way. So it's been very easy to have.
Could you talk a little bit about the previous use of the antennas? There was another amateur radio operator in that office that wanted to do amateur radio from Western?
I gather so. I don't know too much about him, but I had always noticed these antenna up there, and before he left, I had gotten a little information that he was really into ham radios, and at some point in the past, had gotten those antenna up there and pulled the wire down into his office. So I don't have much history on how he was able to do that or anything more about him and the ham radios.
So Andy, anything to add about the Western installation?
Yeah, so like Holly said, it was a very kind of, it seemed like a natural progression through this partnership because of the already existing infrastructure. But in this scenario with Western, when you talk about kind of some of the apprehensions or concerns, I think what we always run into, and we've ran into this with all of our sites, is building a solid plan and partnership with regards to internet access for these nodes. So in some installations, it requires the public internet access through the site. And in this instance, for the Western, we don't have access to our amateur radio internet Wi-Fi network, like our microwave network, like we use in some of the others. So we had to kind of bridge that gap. So there's a lot of kind of IP permissions and some hoops you got to jump through. But ultimately, once they understood the why, we were able to come up with a quality solution, got granted internet access with a static IP address, and it worked out very well.
Question for either of you or both of you. How long did it take from your perspectives? Holly, what was the process like for you, the duration?
I guess I'm not quite sure exactly how long it took us. I know, I've got an email from Joseph in July of 2019, and I think probably it was in place at least by the next summer, if I'm close to remembering correctly.
Yeah, Holly's correct. At the Western install, from kind of conception of the idea of the possibility that we could do it to the final install, there was a duration of time. I think there was a couple things that were at play there. We were installing some other sites. We did do this install and others amidst a COVID environment. which many people and groups and organizations shut down and backed away from all of their kind of capital growth projects. This one we kept forging ahead. So we did that, but we were very cautious to not push real hard, right? So we did things when they were convenient, but in some ways that actually helped us out, because when there wasn't students, there wasn't faculty and staff around, once there was access with the gentleman using that office and we get some of the IP things ironed out, being able to show up to the room was very successful. So it had to do with just getting everybody to a point to they're comfortable to ready to move to the next stage, but it did take a little bit of time.
So Holly, would you recommend this sort of thing for other educational institutions? Because you know they're often located in really convenient places.
Yeah, I do. It's very not obtrusive in any way. I mean, Andy has it set up in a box. You know, so it's very neat. It can just sit on you know, a shelf or a counter or something in the corner of, or I suppose the floor of the room. And you know, I mean, communications are, being in emergency management, communications are always one of those things that is a weak point in any emergency or disaster response. If you think of all the different hazards that you could have in any community, communications are probably going to be affected in some way, and ham radio can be the backup, and by allowing a node to be put in your location, particularly if it's a really helpful location for the operators, you can be making a huge difference to your community with really very little. You know, Andy did all the work. You know, I had to make a few phone calls to, you know, gain access to the room, find out when it was convenient. But really it's, I think the benefits for the community any time that it's used is going to well outweigh any, you know, amount of work that we did. Ours is just, you know, we're providing a location, and, you know, that Andy did everything else.
This is a typical remote monitoring of the system. Andy, you do all of this, right?
Correct. Bryce Schubert was our primary. He has since moved out of the region, but he has still communicated some interest, and he is the trustee for this call sign, W7WWU, and he is able, even though he's moved out of this local area, he is still able to be an operator of the node, and that's one of the great things about it. So he has access as well as the rest of our club and radio group.
So this is one of the keys to the fact of what makes this feasible, is this full remote monitoring capability. And here is the actual node, as Holly said, unobtrusive, with contact information. And here are the existing antennas. Andy, you're only using one of these, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So there was two antenna solutions that they had there at the site. One was for a VHF amateur band side of things, and then the other is for VHF commercial. So they had both amateur and commercial VHF presence.
You don't see these AEA antennas too much anymore.
Correct. But I can tell you that they do perform tremendously well for that site.
Yeah, it's kind of a point of pride to see these antennas, because they were made in Linwood, Washington. Okay, now we're going to talk about another one that's a bit more typical of the rest of the multipurpose remote nodes, of which there are a total of 6 in Whatcom County, correct, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that we're going to talk about next, and Holly absolutely has awareness, and a big part of this one as well, is the Acme Fire Station. This is out in Deming. as this map depicts. So what was great about building this node, creating that partnership with the fire station was our Highway 9 and Acme kind of location. That's a big valley that runs all the way through there, north and south. And there was no real RMS presence. What we can see is W7RE to the north. We have KB7TEC over there to the west. But even all the way up and down through that corridor, there was no RMS WinLink access. So in the event of emergency, and our amateur radio club was out towards Mount Baker or working in that valley or anywhere in that vicinity, we didn't have easy access to get into a node. And this particular installation closed that gap, and it worked very well.
So again, this full remote monitoring and management, the actual fire station where it is installed. And Andy, is the next shot we're going to see, is it right through that people door?
So the node, and this is the old fire station building up front, and then they have their new engine bays out back. We will not see the engine bays, but the node is actually installed in the very, very back left corner of the building in a utility room. And it's funny because the internet for this particular site is on the very front right corner. So the fire chief was very, very accommodating and let us string a tremendous amount of Cat5 across his fire station, but it worked out very well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, in this instance, what we wanted to do is the available space we had was back in a utility room. Oftentimes we find ourselves where people, they kind of have just a very minimal amount of extra space. So we took our node, our rack cabinet, and pushed it up near the ceiling and got it out of everybody's way in a very clean kind of fashion and manner. And it worked out pretty well. So that's just a visual of what that looked like. At this particular site, there was no infrastructure installed, so we had to come up with a rack solution, node installation, all the coax runs, Ethernet runs, but we also had to come up with an antenna solution as well. And I kind of wanted to rethink this particular site and then my approach, and I took a little bit more of a budget approach on this one in the sense that some of the other sites had very robust mounts, very robust name brand antennas, things of that nature. And this one, we still wanted to try to chase performance, but we wanted to try to save some cost and have it be clean as well. So in this scenario, we used some Unistrut. We talked about it with the chief. He liked the plan, some fencing pipe, and that is actually an Ed Fong antenna in the top of that with a nice sealed connection. And it proves to be a very, very good, well-fit antenna for that area and its task that it has to serve. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is where do we go from here? What's next with these nodes? As Steve said, we've had 6 across the county already so far. We've closed the gaps, the major gaps that we found right off the bat, but there are still great opportunities out there. We do have one new site on the horizon, pun intended, I suppose, and it's going to be our first tower site installation, and we're very excited about that. But we're always looking for new ways for amateur radio. The great tool that Bud created, the Nexus cross-patch DRX board, and paired up with the Kenwood radios for this remote access. I think even in today's world, with what's going on, being able to have that support at your fingertips through either we use them in some sites through conventional internet, but primarily what we try to do is put them on ham radio microwave internet backbone, in which case when the systems go down, we still have that access, and we have that from wherever we can jump into the grid or the network ourselves. So it really works good. We're going to keep looking for those opportunities to support.
So that is an ongoing plan or an ongoing task to try and get these nodes connected to microwave internet access.
Correct. We're working to expand that coverage. Absolutely.
Any concluding thoughts, Holly? Overall, it's been a good experience.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, it's been pretty easy. It's kind of working through more of the paperwork permissions. But Andy's, says what he needs and where, and I've just tried to see if that's possible, and it has been. And so he's really done all the work.
Well, thank you, Holly, for your support and participation in this video. And thank you, Andy, for helping out, doing some of the heavy lifting here. And we thank the DCC for the chance to explain our system and get it out in front of so many more people. I guess we're ready for the Q&A part of the presentation.